Let's dive into a real mystery, one that's hiding right at the heart of our legal system. Whenever you read a judicial opinion, it speaks with this incredible ironclad certainty. It's like there was only ever one possible answer. But here's the puzzle. The law itself, it's often anything but certain. So how does all that doubt get magically transformed into absolute confidence? That's the puzzle we're going to piece together. And look, this isn't just me saying this. This quote comes from one of the absolute giants of American law, Justice Benjamin Cardozo. He doesn't describe the law as a clear roadmap. No, he calls it a trackless ocean. He admits his search for certainty was futile. This isn't some fringe critic. This is one of the most respected judges in history, telling us just how deep the uncertainty runs for judges every single day. And yet, when you read the final document, the actual opinion, that feeling of a trackless ocean has just vanished. Poof. Instead, you get language that makes the conclusion feel totally inevitable, like it was the only logical outcome. The whole thing is laid out like a mathematical proof, where every fact and every rule lines up perfectly to give you one and only one right answer. So what gives? How do we get from point A, this ocean of doubt, to point B, this rock-solid document? What's the secret mechanism that takes all the messy, conflicting parts of a legal case and turns them into something that seems completely unshakable? Well, this is basically a psychological detective story. To find our answer, we need to look at the evidence, and we're going to find it inside a real Supreme Court case, Ratzlaff versus United States. It's the perfect case study to see how a judge's mind really works when the going gets tough. So, the facts of the case are pretty simple. You've got this guy, Waldemar Ratzlaff, who owed a casino a ton of money, over $100,000. To pay it back, he goes to a bunch of different banks and buys cashier's checks for just under $10,000 each. Why? Because banks have to report any cash transaction over $10,000. This whole maneuver is called structuring, and, well, he got charged with a crime for doing it. The facts might be simple, but the legal question? Oh, not at all. The justices were facing what psychologists call a dilemma set, basically a tangled mess of conflicting arguments. The entire case hinged on one little word, willfully. Did Ratzlaff have to know that structuring was a specific crime? Or was it enough that he just knew he was dodging the reporting rules? Arguments were flying in every direction. This, right here, is Cardozo's trackless ocean. Okay, so if the law itself is this messy, where does all that certainty come from? Well, to solve this, we have to shift our investigation. We're going to look away from the law books and look at the person reading them. Our prime suspect is the human brain itself and its powerful, deep-seated need to tell a good story. The key concept here is something called coherence bias. It's the brain's automatic and pretty much unconscious habit of taking a jumble of conflicting info and just tidying it up. It subtly reshapes things, it massages the facts, it reinterprets the rules, nudging everything around until it all just clicks into place, forming a smooth, consistent, and really compelling story. And listen, this isn't a bug in our mental software, it's a feature. Our brains are basically coherence engines. When we're faced with a complex problem, they don't just sit there listing pros and cons. They get to work automatically, trying to find the one interpretation where everything just makes sense together. It's how we get through the day and make decisions in a complicated world. Okay, so our brain is a coherence engine, but how does it actually do it? What are the tools it uses to turn that messy dilemma set we talked about into a polished, certain conclusion? Let's pop the hood and look at the method behind the magic. It really comes down to three main techniques, and they're all happening unconsciously. First, there's gatekeeping. That's just deciding which facts and arguments even get to be part of the story. Second is bolstering. That's like turning up the volume on some pieces of evidence while turning it way down on others. And third, rule selection. The law is full of conflicting rules, and the brain just picks the one that fits the story it's already starting to build. Let's make this real. Back to the Ratzlaff case. The dissenting opinion, the one that voted to convict him, tells a story about this active, scheming guy. But the majority opinion, the one that voted to acquit, it just kind of leaves those details out. Their story paints Ratzlaff as much more passive. It's the same defendant, same actions, but you get two totally different stories just by deciding which facts get through the gate. And this is a brilliant illustration of rule selection. A legal scholar named Carl Llewellyn showed that for almost every rule of legal interpretation, there's another rule that says the exact opposite. He called them thrust and parry. So should a judge stick only to the exact words of a law? One rule says yes, but can they look past the words to find the law's purpose? Another rule says, you bet. The brain's coherence engine just picks whichever rule helps the story along. So what's the end result of all this cognitive work? When this process finally plays out, what do you get? Well, let's look at the verdicts. This is where things get really wild. So remember our starting point, the dilemma set. On just one issue, what Congress meant when they wrote the law, the justices were juggling 30 different competing ideas. And the poll of those arguments was split almost perfectly down the middle, 50-50. It was a total mess. But now, look at the after picture from the majority opinion. That messy web has been completely transformed. In their final written opinion, every single one of their 64 points supports their conclusion. Acquittal. No loose ends, no lingering doubts. It's a story of perfect internal coherence. And here's the absolute kicker. What did the dissenting justices do with the exact same raw material? They also built a perfectly coherent story. Their opinion has 61 propositions, and every last one of them points in their direction, conviction. It's a second, equally flawless, but completely opposite story. So let's just let that sink in for a second. 9 of the smartest legal minds in the country, looking at one set of facts and one body of law, and they produce 2 flawless, totally consistent, and completely contradictory stories. This is the certainty puzzle, right here in black and white. Okay, but here comes the twist. You might be thinking, are the judges just making this up? Are they being deceptive? The answer, it turns out, is all about the psychology of feeling right. And this is the most important part. This whole process, the gatekeeping, the bolstering, the rule picking, it's all happening largely outside of their conscious awareness. The mind just automatically works to get rid of the discomfort of a hard choice. So by the time a judge reaches a decision, they're not even aware of how much their own perception has shifted. To them, the case now genuinely feels clear and one-sided. This gives us a totally new way to understand the famous judicial hunch. It's not some random guess. A hunch is the conscious feeling you get from this incredibly complex, unconscious coherence-building process. It's that moment a judge just knows what the right answer is, even if they can't quite explain yet how they got there. And that's because most of the heavy lifting was done unconsciously. And this brings us right back to Justice Cardozo. He described this feeling perfectly. He talked about how a solution seems to emerge from a fog of unconscious origins, slowly lighting up the path forward. He knew intuitively that the feeling of being right wasn't something he found in a law book. It was something that grew out of the deep hidden workings of his own mind. So, we've gone from a trackless ocean of doubt to the solid ground of certainty, but it leaves us with a final, really big thought. If that powerful feeling of being right is something our brains create just to solve a conflict, rather than something we discover out in the world, what does that mean for our search for truth? Not just in law, but everywhere. It's something to think about, isn't it?